Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon.
Next up on Sanctuary, a conversation about the future of seminaries in the United States.
Welcome to Sanctuary, bringing you conversation and stories at the intersection of life and faith. This edition of Sanctuary is produced in cooperation with the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Sanctuary. I'm Nisan Chavkin, Executive Director of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago. Our region is a great center of seminaries and theological schools in the United States. Like so many institutions, however, seminaries are re-examining what they do and how they do it to fulfill their mission today and in the future. On Sanctuary, we will look at the future of seminaries as we learn more about the role these remarkable institutions play in their own faith traditions in our larger community. And I've invited two guests as our guides today. David Crawford, President of McCormick Theological Seminary in Hyde Park, and Javier Viera, President of Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston. Gentlemen, welcome to Sanctuary.
Thank you.
So glad you can make your day fit us here and share with us about what's going on. And I think to get us rolling, if you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do there. And so just give us a start there. David, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. A pleasure to be here. We've been in business since 1829.
Okay.
So
all right.
We've been around a while. We were moved here, actually packed up and moved from southern Indiana by Cyrus McCormick back in 1860. So we have been here in Chicago since 1860. We've had a number of homes here in the Chicago downtown area, as well as up on the north side of the city. For about 100 years, we were up in Lincoln Park. The entire eastern half of the DePaul University campus is the old McCormick campus. And anybody who's walked around that neighborhood knows that a lot of those old McCormick buildings are still there. We moved to Hyde Park in 1975, and it was a transformative event for us. And so for us, it's been an opportunity to really grow as the city has grown, to become more deeply involved in the affairs of this city, the civic life of this city, the political life of this city. And I think we've continued to do that now since 1860 here in Chicago.
Wow. Okay, so I have to come to you when I need a reaper, but we'll come back to that later. Javier, what's with Garrett Evangelical and you?
We too have been around for a very long time, although not quite as long as McCormick. We are the amalgam, if you will, of three different institutions in the Chicagoland area. So founded originally in 1853 by the same people who founded Northwestern University on the same piece of property. We've shared a campus since our opening day. That was originally Garrett Biblical Institute, but then there was a sister institution called Evangelical Theological Seminary in Naperville, Illinois, that was founded by the German-speaking strand of the Wesleyan Methodist movement. And then there was the Chicago Training School that was founded here in the city, really focused by Methodists, but focused on the growing city of Chicago to serve the poor, the recent migrant community, immigrant community, and really to try to address issues of poverty, migration, education, that gave birth to the social work movement in the United States. And so there's a long tradition of wanting to provide an education for a learned clergy, to provide access to education for immigrant communities, and to address issues of social justice and access to communities who are poor and marginalized, and wanting to address the issues that they face as well. So it's a long legacy and history that we're very proud of.
Wow. So I think you tipped us into sort of the next piece, which is explaining to me who never went to seminary, and to our viewers, what is it that a seminary actually does? What's your mission? How does that function? What is it you do?
Well, I think Javier really just in that last bit talking about not just the history of Garrett, but of the work they've been doing for decades. And McCormick's work it would mirror that. Back in the turn of the 20th century, we were sending our students into the settlement houses here in Chicago. Lincoln Park back in those days was not the Lincoln Park we know it today. And so we were training people to be part of an urban environment, to go out and work on issues of social justice going back to that point in time. And throughout the 20th century, even the mid-1950s, as people were coming back from the war, coming into seminary, we were sending them down to the steel mills to get an education to work in steel mills, because they were going into those communities. When that was where they were going to serve, those were the people of the congregations and many of the churches where we were placing our students. And so there's been this long arc of involvement in the community, particularly in the areas of social justice and the movements around social justice. And so for us today, I think most of us who don't know a lot about seminaries, certainly I'm neither a pastor nor an academic, and I happen to serve on the board of McCormick and had the honor of serving on the board of trustees there for a number of years before being called to serve on the staff. And McCormick has had an experience over those years of sort of, I think, transitioning into this arena of not just training pastors for the pulpit, but training community leaders, providing educational opportunities for doctors, lawyers, engineers. We've had all sorts of people come through McCormick because we think that this underlying theological education is actually an enhancement to other professions as well. And so it's not just training pastors for service in the church, but training people to serve in the community. It's training others, lay leaders, to be able to provide programming, innovative programming, curriculum within churches and within community organizations. So I think all of us in theological education feel we have a much broader mission and impact on our communities than I think most people recognize. And I think, and I'm sure this is the case at Garrett as well, there's an element of scholarship that goes on in seminaries that really doesn't go on in the same way in colleges and universities. And so there's a major contribution of scholarship that also comes, I think, out of most of our seminaries.
So you're not just training pastors?
Not just training pastors.
Has that been, is that a new thing? Is it true also at Garrett? Yeah?
I think it's absolutely true at Garrett. I think that historically we can say that we have focused on training. I think it's true for both of our institutions and most seminaries, that we have primarily trained pastors and trained scholars for the academy, right? For departments of religion, for theological schools, graduate schools, who then train, right, the next generation of religious leaders who create knowledge in the areas of the theological disciplines, right? And I think that that's something that both of our schools are still very committed to. We think that it's an important area of the academy that while is increasingly being de-emphasized in many universities, I think that seminaries continue to play a very important role in developing the next generation of theological scholars and researchers that I think is critical. And so we are very deeply committed to continuing to do that. But as David has already said, we think that theological education is, historically it was one of the queen of sciences, right? I mean, along with philosophy and with mathematics and right, and others, right? And so that is important in that I believe that a theological education in some ways is the quintessential humanistic education that can inform many different professions and vocations and disciplines. And I think that we continue to do that to this day. So people come to us who are artists, who are journalists, who are lawyers, who are physicians, and who want a moral, ethical, theological kind of grounding or deepening to the work they're already doing. And that's not the largest part of our work, but it's a significant amount of our work, and that we're deeply committed to. And I think that that is potentially going to continue to grow.
Okay, so this changes all my questions, which is fine. But so as we look at, you wanted to ask?
No, but what I was going to say, though, I think that it's important to go back to your original question, which is, what is a seminary? And I think that we can't lose sight of the fact that in some ways a seminary still is, in fact, a place that is a reservoir, if you will, of knowledge, it's a place where a tradition holds its history, its liturgy, its the knowledge of the years that it's built up and that it passes down to the next generation. But I think at its best, what a seminary does, it's a place of encounter where people from different experiences and different places, different nations, come together and they encounter texts, they encounter ideas, they have shared experiences, and they are transformed by the conversations, the debates, the prayer life, the liturgical life that takes place in that mix, by the difference that they encounter with each other. And what I hope at its best a seminary does is that in some ways it opens up, it transforms a mind to go then into the world to do transformative work on behalf of the tradition that has called them into the life of ministry or the life of scholarship. If that is what's happening in seminaries, and I think that we're doing our work, if that kind of transformative engagement with texts, with ideas, with people, with individuals, with communities, then I think that we continue to play a deeply meaningful and important place in society and for the church.
Amen.
Yeah, amen indeed. And this engagement with the community, and we'll take a break in just a moment, but it sounds like it's been, in varying iterations, has been core to what the church has been, or the seminary has been in the world, as well as, not quite of it, but working in it a lot, almost since the beginning of both of your institutions. And from what you say, it's common to other seminaries across the country.
Well, I think, as Javier says, that is part of that both formational and transformational experience that I think our students receive at our schools. And it's an eye-opener for many people. Some are very deeply called and have discerned this call over a long period of time. Others get the opportunity to come and aren't really sure what to expect, and then come in and have this transformational experience in the classroom. And it not just in the classroom, but then in the work that we do in the community.
How cool. Well, thank you. I'm excited for here, and we're going to get ourselves to look at, in a moment, at what's next for your seminaries and other seminaries here in the country when we come back after this brief break.
Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon.
Welcome back to Sanctuary. I'm Nisan Chavkin, and I'm speaking today with President David Crawford of McCormick Theological Seminary and President Javier Viera of Garrett Evangelical Seminary about the future of seminaries. And indeed, the future is this interesting thing, because most religious institutions across the country and around the world went through a radical change during the pandemic. We were locked out of our buildings. And it's a real question, particularly thinking about what you both have been talking about, and the importance of personal encounter, of going into the community. How did you deal with the fact that you couldn't even see each other, much less go out on the street or talk to anyone without how did it work? How did you do that?
Well,
were you able to do it? I mean,
well, that's a fair question, and I think we're still in a process of trying to understand all of the things we learned. I think what most of us found out is we were probably more adaptable than we thought we were. We learned how to be more flexible about things. I think this is true at most institutions. We learned to care about ourselves in different ways and find ways to reach out and build community in this new space.
How? Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Weekly meetings with all of our staff and all of our faculty and our students, regular meetings in context, prayer meetings in the morning, all online, but just with more repetition, with more occurrences during the week, more touch points during the week. And I think each of us then also built on that by making sure we were reaching out to people more directly as we could under those circumstances. So, I think we all sort of, and this is true outside the higher education seminary world, we all sort of started at the same place at the pandemic. It was new to all of us. We all had to learn it. We've all kind of gone through it at different rates, and we're coming out of it in different ways. And different parts of our community have been impacted in different ways. And so how we react now, how do we change, how do we sort of fit into this new world that we live in, you're going to see, and I think you've seen it at McCormick, you'll see it at other schools, is where do we go from here? Does this all continue online? We have students certainly who found being online to be extraordinarily convenient. And while they missed being together, there is this balancing that I think a lot of folks are doing these days, particularly our mid-career students or students who are coming in kind of in the middle stages of life where they've got a lot of other activities going on. And so there's a convenience factor that comes from that. We've kind of taken a path that we don't think that we can do all of what we do yet as well online in a complete online fashion. So we're shaping a lot of, as other schools are, more of a hybrid opportunity in different ways of gathering, different ways to bring people together that will allow both some flexibility for students who are looking for the flexibility, but also give them the kind of formational experience that we have traditionally provided and will continue to work on ways to provide as we walk into this new environment.
Got it. Javier, was there if we phrase it this way, is there a keeper from something that happened during the pandemic that was like, yeah, we're going to continue doing that? And is there something that we're going back to this, and until we have to nail the door shut, we're gonna keep going back to this thing? So one of each. Is there something?
Maybe, but let me say that at Garrett, this was more of a shock to the system, I think, than perhaps it was at McCormick, because Garrett was still a school that was almost entirely an in-person experience. We had not made any progress really to a hybrid or online program. None of our programs were offered in that way. It was still a mostly entirely residential program. And so going into the pandemic was a real shock to the system, and having to immediately make transitions that the institution wasn't prepared for. I should also say that I came into my role mid-pandemic. So I was at another institution, right, when the pandemic started, and I didn't. So when I came into my role, it was 8 or 9 months before I met the majority of my colleagues and students, for sure.
Our first meeting was a Zoom meeting.
Exactly, exactly. And so, but I think that now, in hindsight, having made the transition, if there is a keeper, it is that there is a great value in being able to do education and our organizational life in a hybrid fashion, because what it has allowed us to do is it's allowed us, I think, to see the humanity of our students in a different way, to give some more work-life balance to our staff, right? I mean, to allow for that in a way that before, I think that we were probably institutionally pretty rigid around when we were there and how we did things. We still did things, believe it or not, by filling out forms in person that you turned in. Now we have literally digitized everything, so that's a keeper. There'll be no going back. I mean, there's a lot that this pandemic thankfully forced us to do that we were able to kind of put off for no really good reason. And so in that sense, I'm actually very grateful for the disruption that this caused institutionally. I think in terms of, I want to reiterate something that David said in terms of some things that I think we would pull back on is it became very clear to us that an entirely online future, as some of our sister institutions have opted for, is not something that we are going to choose to do. There's something of value to being present to one another, the experience of embodiment. We after all, are an incarnational faith. That matters, and being present to one another is something that became very clear to us that has to be a part of the experience, both of our faculty and staff and our students, the educational and learning experience and the work experience. So we're going to figure this out. We're still figuring this out, but the future for us, I think, will be a hybrid experience, a robust hybrid experience, not a one or the other.
So picking up on the future, and because I'm so grateful, frankly, to your seminaries, that they're so very much a part of the fabric of our city and our region. That it's not just locked away and you come out all formed, but you're working side by side and participating in the community and the issues of the community. How do you see the future of those encounters, I guess, as your seminaries go into the next 10 or 20 years, where we're almost as if there's a divide between people who are increasingly comfortable digital, they have the means, they have the resources, and they can talk to people on the other side of the world. That's part of their day. And people who have trouble thinking beyond the bounds of a half-mile radius around their home, who are also part of your catchment of people that you're caring for. How do you get your students in those spaces, given this sort of wild bifurcation, in a way, of a lot of what looks like our future one dimension of our future might be?
Well, I think those are really challenging issues, and it's not just.
You've got 30 seconds to
I
solve.
got 30 seconds on it. You see it in the church too. Folks are trying to figure out how to, are people coming back, and in a lot of cases, not coming back, at least not in the numbers they were pre-pandemic. And so, as much as we are, I think, creating these opportunities that'll have these new kinds of delivery, whether they're hybrid or they're cohort models or ways to bring people together, we've got to create spaces that give those folks flexibility in their lives, because I think that's going to be, that is just with us, and that's going to continue with us. So I don't know that any of us has the secret sauce yet on how to do that. What I would say, and what I talk to all of our folks about, is whatever we come up with, we may have to change it again in 2 or 3 years. Or the idea that you can do something now, and this is a hard thing. You talked about the disruption element of it. We were all pretty comfortable with the way things were, and that's true of a lot of places. But this notion that you can make these changes or add a new program that might be successful for a couple of years, and you're making these investments, and they're sizable investments in them as well. The notion that that's going to continue in perpetuity is part of another world. We've got to sort of be able to continue to adapt, and so this has been a nice time for us to kind of catch our breaths a little bit from a really difficult and challenging 2 years. But it's not just the students that have to adapt. It's the institutions, as Javier's talked about, in terms of how do we administer the programs. We're a highly regulated industry. We've got a lot of regulatory issues, both with the Department of Education and, of course, with our accreditors. So the adaptability goes beyond just our students being flexible and adaptive, but our faculties, our staff, our boards have to think very differently about how we do things and be prepared to make changes as needed.
And I would add, and you're living through this in a very real way right now, David, it's that I think it helped us, or it freed us, if you will, to think much more freely about our mission rather than our buildings as our identity. And so much of our identity has been wrapped up in our physical location and our buildings. And it's not as if location doesn't matter, because our communities that we serve, the location where we are, the setting, that really does matter. But what what the pandemic helped us to do and the way that we had to respond, it helped us to think more quickly, what is our mission? What is it? What are we really about? And it zeroed us in, at least at our board level. That conversation became much more robust. And it shifted away from what are the projects that we need to do in terms of our infrastructure to what are we being called to missionally? And what is it that we need to secure for the future in order that we can equip our students to go into the world to do this as unburdened as possible so that they can actually be the courageous prophetic leaders that we want them to be, right? And in that sense, I think the pandemic has been a gift to the institutional life of seminaries because it's forced those kinds of conversations. And so in that sense, in terms of the communities that we serve, it has helped us see them in a way that is fresh and it's renewed our commitment to those communities. And in some ways, it's expanded the way we think about communities because our students were now much more physically located in a broader understanding of physical community. And so we had to think of those communities as our communities as well, right? Because that's where they were living out their field placements rather than right here where we had placed them. We had to make adjustments to accommodate where they were physically, and that was meaning globally. And so we had to think about that and the impact of that work, which again it expanded the way we had to think institutionally and our impact across the globe, which was a gift as well.
Well, that is, I think, the opportunity to think about the fact that we might fail. Our great solutions now don't quite work, and the next might not be so great in 3 years' time or 5 years' time is very helpful. And this opportunity to reflect on mission in a very, less of a drawing room exercise and much more putting it in place is a real remarkable, those are good things to take out of an otherwise disastrous situation. So I'm glad that both of your institutions are so strong and doing this vital work in our community and for your traditions. I thank you both. I want to thank officially our guests, Mr. David Crawford of McCormick Theological Seminary, Dr. Javier Viera of Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary for joining us today. And our thanks to you as well for tuning in to this episode of Sanctuary. Until next time, good health and peace.
Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon